focus on one of these 66 books, either in the Old or New Testament, for the entire year. Now, this seems crazy, but I think this is a very, very underappreciated reading method when it comes to our acquisition of biblical truth. I was listening to the late R.C. Sproul, and he was reflecting on his time when he was working on his PhD in the Netherlands. So he moves from the United States to go to the Netherlands to study and took it upon himself to have a specific reading companion during his few years of study. And what he picked was the prophet Jeremiah. So that's a big book. You could do this with any of the 66 books, but this is a big one, 52 chapters. And what he did was he went through sometimes fast, sometimes slow readings, but careful study of the prophet Jeremiah for a few years. And he came away from that deeply affected by just how helpful it was to really lean in to a particular book of the Bible and come away after all of that feeling almost like you have ownership to it. Now, I mean that in a positive sense, not a prideful sense. Like you have some special connection to that book. You know it like you know one of your children. You know it in a deep way, and you have so many categories that you associate with that book because you've put in the time and you've carefully looked. And most importantly, you have been greatly impacted by it. So I had not quite that extreme of a situation, but last year in seminary, we in our one of our preaching classes, we spent the latter half of the semester taking turns, myself and my other classmates taking turns, passage by passage, preaching through the prophet Zephaniah. Zephaniah is only 3 chapters, so it's not nearly the size of Jeremiah. But I would presume that for you, like me, you're way less familiar with a prophet like Zephaniah than you are a prophet like Isaiah or Jonah or even Malachi. And so for a lot of us, it's an obscure book. It's like Zephaniah or Obadiah. Like we don't know much about them. Maybe you have a few categories in your mind, but you don't know much about them. You certainly don't know the way in which they relate to the other prophets and how they're leaning into the coming of Christ and all that is ours in him as he fulfills these prophetic voices. So what myself and my classmates did is we took turns preaching through the prophet Zephaniah. And this means for me, for a number of months, I'm reading through those 3 chapters of Zephaniah. Also, I'm reading about the prophet Zephaniah. I'm reading this in academic articles. I'm reading this in commentaries. I'm reading this in study Bible notes. I'm reading this in Old Testament textbook. There's a lot of ways that we can do this. And after we all went through the prophet Zephaniah, then at the very end of the year, I had the opportunity to preach for 4 consecutive weeks at my local church. And so I preached through the entire book of Zephaniah in 4 sermons. I probably would have preferred if I would have had a bigger time frame to do like 6 or 8 sermons on it, but still I got through it in 4 sermons. And so now what I'm doing is I'm working through Zephaniah in even more of a concentrated way because I'm not just focused on my one passage I'm going to preach at seminary. I'm focused on the whole book because I'm preaching through all of it. So I'm doing more reading through Zephaniah. Because I have some acquisition of Hebrew, I'm reading the original language of Zephaniah, and I'm looking at um, some important literary features and all the rest. And I'm spending time and I'm writing my way through Zephaniah because I always do kind of a high level exposition. I type it out to get my thoughts all clear for my sermon, and then I'm maybe doing an outline, maybe I'm doing a manuscript, but I'm thinking through and writing through the book. And this all happened from August to December. Now, that's a nice chunk of time, but if you think about that and stretch it out to the entire year, you can do the same thing as you think, what is one book of the Bible that I really want to know? I really want to double down and wrap my head around this particular book of the Bible. And the way that you would do that, now I grant that most of you don't know Hebrew or Greek. Most of you are not going to be preaching through a book of the Bible this year. So maybe some of you are, but most of you probably aren't. So, how does what I did correlate to what you should do? Well, a simple rhythm that you could do, and I think about this, my friend Matthew Everhard was talking about this a while back in terms of studying someone in church history. And the way that he recommends doing this is you read something that that person wrote, and then you read something about that person. So let's say it's like somebody that I really follow in church history and study is John Owen. So the way that you would do this, if you want to know more about John Owen and really wrap your mind around him, you would read a a writing from John Owen, and then you would read something about John Owen. So maybe it's a biography, maybe it's a study of something that he wrote, an analysis of it and interaction with it. And you rinse and repeat. So you read John Owen, you read about John Owen, you read John Owen, you read about John Owen. Now, that is a nice approach for studying a particular book of the Bible. So, what I'm not suggesting is if you pick, let's say, Revelation, you simply just read Revelation January through December nonstop. Now, you can do that and you should do that, but I think a better way to do this is actually threefold. So, let's say number 1, you read Revelation. And then after you read Revelation, you read about Revelation. This could be a commentary. You could do this in tandem as you're reading it. You could read the commentary section and read that section in Revelation. You don't have to do it necessarily, pivoting back and forth. So you read Revelation, you read about Revelation, and then you write something about Revelation. Now, I refer you to my previous video that I've made about wide margin Bibles writing notes. This would count, or journaling Bibles, writing a digest of that particular chapter. That would count. Or if you're willing, then getting a journal and writing your own commentary. And the power of this is that you're taking in the biblical source, then you're taking in the insights from someone else in a commentary or in a some kind of accessible study to Revelation, and then you're getting out your own thoughts. They're not stuck in here, kind of vaguely swimming around. You can't quite wrap your hands around them and grasp them, but you're getting them out. And when you do that, you're retaining even more. And this is so incredibly powerful because say you do that the first time around, you might not have a whole lot to wrap your mind around Revelation. Now, certainly Revelation would be a challenging one. I'm kind of using arguably the most challenging book in the entire Bible for this example. But let's say you don't get a whole lot out of Revelation. Maybe you come away the first time and you simply say, well, after doing that, now I know there's 22 chapters in Revelation. I didn't know that before, but now I do. The second time around, you're not only taking with you the knowledge that you gained from reading Revelation, but also reading about Revelation, writing a little bit about Revelation. Now you come back to it and you start to notice these themes that come up. Maybe it's the theme of three or it's the theme of seven. Those are very prominent in the book of Revelation. And then you go through it again and you come back and you start to notice maybe a structural element that, the things that are mentioned in the letters to the seven churches, such as the rewards that Christ mentions, or the descriptions of himself as he reveals himself to these seven churches. Those come up again later in the book of Revelation. And you start to build this acquisition of the book. And the more you go through it, the more you glean. And this is something that you cannot get by simply having Revelation as one of the 66 books you're trying to plow through this year. This is only something that you can get by a high concentrated level of focus toward that book, a long term investment for that entire year. You're not going to come away at the end of the year knowing all there is to know about it. But it would be impossible not to come away at the end of that year knowing a whole lot more about it than you did to begin with. And you can play around with maybe reading a chapter a day. You're still going to get through it in less than a month. Maybe reading 7 chapters a day, or maybe set a timer and sit down and see how long it takes you to read through the entire book of Revelation. And I would say for average reading speed, it's probably going to be about an hour. So even in that, you could have, in two 30-minute settings, 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes at night, you get through the entire book of Revelation in a day. And again, experiment with this, play around with it. It's not that you have to have this giant agenda to check off every day. And it's certainly not that Revelation is the only book that you're reading for the entire year. You should still explore and be in other passages of scripture. You should do this because you're going to be sitting under the preaching of God's word at your local church. You should be, at least. And as you do that, then you're going to be exposed to other passages. If you're in study groups with other people, if you're doing family Bible reading, you're in other books of the Bible. Again, this is not to say this is all you do, but your big goal, your interest of what you want to accomplish this year is focused on one book of the Bible. Now, I did that with Zephaniah for roughly half a year. It was tremendous. I know so much more about it than I did before I went through that semester and preached through the book. And I really commend this to you. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful idea. So that's your first option. Pick one book and make that your year-long partner as you read through it and read about it.